Hello everyone, welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. Iraq is disintegrating under the terrorist gains of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria forces, also called ISIS. Despite billions of US dollars spent by America in an effort to train and equip Iraqi soldiers during the 8 years there, Iraqi security forces are now crumbling under the ISIS reign of terror. Now the Shiite-led government is begging for help as its tenuous hold on the country deteriorates. Earlier this week, ISIS captured Mosul, Iraq's second-largest city and critical oil hub. The New Yorker says the capture of Mosul is the most dramatic example of the resurgence of the country's sectarian war. Death was everywhere in the sacked city of Mosul, wrote the Washington Post. From beheadings to summary executions, to amputations, to crucifixions, the terrorist group has become the most feared organization in the Middle East. So this is the new reality of the post-American Middle East.
This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world.
And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
Over the last several months, the Iraqi Prime Minister has been just begging the United States to intervene in Iraq and to prevent the Islamist takeover of that nation that we occupied just 30 months ago, just 2.5 years ago. American forces were there, and according to the New York Times this week, going back 5, 6, 7 months now, Iraq has been pleading for help, urging the United States to get involved. This is from that New York Times piece, June the 11th, just this past week. It says, as the Sunni insurgents have grown in strength, those requests have persisted, the requests from the Iraqi government, that is. It says, in a May 11th meeting with American diplomats and General Lloyd Austin III, the head of the Central Command, it says, Mr. Maliki said he would like the United States to provide Iraq with the ability to operate drones. But if the United States was not willing to do that, Mr. Maliki indicated he was prepared to allow the United States to carry out strikes using warplanes or drones. It says, finally, in a May 16th phone call, so this is almost a month ago, with Vice President Joseph Biden, Mr. Maliki again suggested that the United States consider using American air power. A written request repeating that point was submitted soon afterward, officials said. So a lot of what you've been reading this week, at least about the U.S. response to what's happening in Iraq, or lack thereof, I guess I should say, is that the U.S. was sort of caught off guard and didn't quite know that this was going to explode like that it has. In any event, if you've been following the news, you see the situation as it is on the streets of Iraq, as those Islamist forces now push up all the way to Baghdad. Now, Iraq certainly has to share in some of the blame for the predicament that it's in, because Maliki, who's begging for help now, he wasn't that willing to compromise back in 2011 when Iraq and the U.S. were trying to reach a new status of forces agreement. But the Obama administration wasn't really eager to strike a deal with Iraq that would have left U.S. forces there, a small group, for the years to come. We got out, and we said the mission was accomplished, and some even declared victory. Let me just take you to a speech by the President. This was at Fort Bragg toward the end of 2011 in December.
It's harder to end a war than begin one. Indeed, everything that American troops have done in Iraq, all the fighting, and all the dying, the bleeding, and the building, and the training, and the partnering, all of it has led to this moment of success. Now, Iraq's not a perfect place. It has many challenges ahead. But we're leaving behind a sovereign, stable, and self-reliant Iraq, with a representative government that was elected by its people. We're building a new partnership between our nations. And we are ending a war, not with a final battle, but with a final march toward home. This is an extraordinary achievement. Nearly 9 years in the making.
So that was just 30 months ago, 2.5 years ago. And now, I mean, that's certainly not seen as a success. It certainly isn't seen, Iraq that is, it's not seen as stable. It's not a tremendous achievement by any means. But it wasn't very long ago we were talking about Al-Qaeda being on the run and the terrorists having no safe haven to gather in. But now what you see building across the northern parts of Syria and the northeastern region of Iraq is a pretty large safe haven for these Sunni extremists. That, as I said, is the situation. You may have seen also from some of the more conservative blogs this past week, comments from Vice President Biden back in 2010 in an interview where he said that we would look back on Iraq as one of the great achievements of the Obama administration, and now it's just in a mess. I mean, it's rivaling Syria with its sectarian violence, with its civil war, basically. It's just turned into an absolute mess. This echoes some of the same points from that New York Times piece. It's from Bloomberg this week. It says the U.S. has yet to respond to a request from Iraq made last month to mount air attacks against militant training camps in western Iraq, according to two American officials who asked not to be identified discussing internal deliberations. It says one of the officials said President Barack Obama is reluctant to revisit a war that he opposed and has repeatedly declared over. That gives you the reason. It's a pretty candid response, given anonymously, but still a pretty candid response. He was against the war from the beginning, and then after he pulled out the troops, he declared that the war is over. Mission accomplished. Of course, the terrorists didn't get that memo. Just because the United States says the war is over, of course, it doesn't mean that the violence ends. In any event, as America pulls out and now looks like it's willing to, well, not willing to offer any kind of response to this so-called partnership that was forged between Iraq and the United States, who's going to step in and fill the power void? Is Iraq just going to descend into chaos? Splitting apart? I mean, it perhaps could. But who do you suppose is going to intervene and help that Shiite government if the United States stands along the sidelines and does nothing? This is a report from Fox News. Just yesterday, Iran is coming to the aid of its historic nemesis. This is Iran now. It says sending elite fighters to Iraq in the wake of a Sunni insurgency that has claimed two key northern cities and now threatens Baghdad. It goes on and says, although Iran and Iraq were at war in the 1980s, both the Maliki regime and the rulers in Tehran are Shiite, and Iran does not want a fanatical jihadist takeover of its neighbor. Iran has positioned troops along its border with Iraq and has threatened to bomb opposition forces if they come within about 60 miles of Iran's border, according to an Iranian army general. So who's moving, who's mobilizing its forces to assist that Shiite administration in Baghdad? Well, it's its next door neighbor, Iran, which we've been telling you all these years. The U.S. effectively handed Iraq over to after our departure there in 2011. That same article, it quotes Iranian President Rouhani as saying, this is an extremist terrorist group that is acting savagely. He's talking about the ISIS group that's putting that reign of terror on large swaths of Iraq. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. The Iranian president just shocked at the brutality of these terrorist organizations, these extremists that are making such great gains in Iraq. carrying on with this Fox News report, it says, if Iraq's pleas for support are rebuffed by the U.S., it may have no choice but to turn to Iran, said experts. So this is the reality, as I said at the top, of the post-American world. Just look at the headline that was posted at the Drudge Report earlier today. Iran to the rescue, it asks. That's the world we live in. That's the Middle East of today, Iran to the rescue. With all this chaos in Iraq, and last year, of course, it was Russia that swooped in to enable the United States to save face on Syria. Russia to the rescue in Syria. Iran to the rescue in Iraq. This is the Wall Street Journal, June 12th. Iran has invested considerable financial, political, and military resources over the past decade to ensure Iraq emerged from the U.S. war as a strategic partner. This is what we told you would happen for many, many years for the Islamic Republic and a strong Shiite-led state. It says the so-called Shiite crescent stretching from Iran to Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria was forged largely as a result of this effort. So, as is brought out there, and as we would add, do you think Iran is just going to sit back and allow this extremist Sunni movement to take over its neighbor to the west? It's not going to sit back and do nothing. One last comment from this Wall Street Journal piece. It says the involvement of Iran would pose yet another security challenge for the White House and raises the prospect of the U.S. and Iran fighting on the same side. The U.S. opposes Iran's support for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, but with Tehran is jointly supporting Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. So we're against Iran and its position in Syria, but now allied with them in some ways in the position over Iraq. What a tangled web this is. And the United States really is unable to do much of anything, just totally impotent on the world scenes, particularly in the Middle East. And of course, we're about to follow this same plan of move out the troops and declare victory with Afghanistan. We'll talk a little bit more after the break about the bigger picture here of all that's been happening in the Middle East in recent years. But right now I want to take you to a promo that we've prepared. I mentioned the other day about the new musical that we're going to be putting on this stage. You can see some of the pieces for the set behind me. The new musical by Ryan Malone called Morning Star. And we've put together a 5-minute piece that gives you a behind-the-scenes look of all the preparations going into that upcoming production.
Students from Imperial Academy and Herbert W. Armstrong College will perform a new musical by Ryan Malone on June 22nd. Morning Star debuts during the 2014 Philadelphia Church of God Ministerial Conference and focuses on the work of 12th century apostle Peter Waldo.
Peter Waldo was called by some a reformer, an apostle. He was a significant figure of the Church of God in the Middle Ages.
This event, and the deacon kind of consoled him, but we must obey God.
And you know, when you're doing the rehearsing, you've got the singing, the dancing, as well as all the behind-the-scenes elements that are being made, the props, the sets, and the costumes.
Since the end of May, 31 Imperial students and 4 Armstrong students have been rehearsing on the Armstrong College campus in Edmond, Oklahoma. The group has put in more than 30 hours of practice at Barbara Floor Memorial Hall and at Armstrong Auditorium.
My character's name is Stephen, and the role I play is a translator. I help translate the Bible to Peter Waldo. towards the beginning, I took a lot of time and just trying to get my part down and making sure I knew what was going on and when, and that's what we're working on now, just making sure that we know where to go, when, and how to really make it come alive to the audience.
At the same time, 16 students from Imperial Academy have devoted 2- and 3-hour practices perfecting their Irish dance steps for Morning Star.
And we have only 3 numbers, which compared to our last musical is quite downsized. So I feel like the quality actually is going to be pretty phenomenal. Some new stuff that we haven't really shown anyone before.
The singers and dancers may be the stars of the show, but staging this musical would be impossible without behind-the-scenes contributions from several volunteers and PCG departments. In the music department, staff member Emily Burns and Armstrong College students Jamie Hawkins and Alicia Lancaster are carving, cutting, painting, gluing, and measuring out an array of props for the show.
We constructed these books out of cardboard, actually. It was a several step process. Alicia made this on script herself on her iPad. She had an art program there. And then we had to cut out pieces of paper and we carved them to look like pages of the book. And then we also had to cut out cardboard to look in the shape of a book, and we also used paper towel rolls. I would say about 2 weeks to complete. We made 30 of them.
In the maintenance department, staff members Cecil Burks and Douglas Culpepper and student Michael Benedetti are fashioning set pieces for the musical's 2 scenes, a town square and a schoolroom.
So far, we've built 2 windows that'll go beside a blackboard. We built 4 fold-up tables. We're in the process of building 4 more tables that are not fold-up. We'll build a fireplace or a hearth to surround a fireplace. As far as I know, as of now, that's all. We sometimes find out things on the fly.
Along with local PCG member Rachel Hyde, member Deborah Hirma is putting her final touches on Morning Star's medieval-style costumes.
Well, I've been sewing for a very long time. My mother was a seamstress and she taught me how to sew. And then the actual costuming itself started when we needed costumes for the Irish dancers a couple of years ago. We're using a lot of the tunics from Jeremiah and some of the red dresses from the David musical, a few of the tunics from the David musical, some of the leads costumes from Jeremiah. You know, just seeing the finished product and seeing it up there on stage, the whole process, I just love the whole process.
In spite of it being a student production, I don't think that's going to relegate it to a lower status in terms of what people take from it and how they identify with really a somewhat lesser known, lesser talked about figure of history. But it's our history, and it's our present day existence.
Morning Star premieres June 22nd in Armstrong Auditorium.
As I said, I want to just step back now and look at the Middle East, Northern Africa, the region as a whole, and all that's been happening there. Particularly since the Arab Spring of a few years ago. This was something that the Washington Post, the editorial board there, rattled off just the other day. Again, this is the previous one I gave to you was the New York Times, talking about the United States not offering any help, any kind of support to Iraq. And this is from the Washington Post. Another newspaper that's given a lot of favorable coverage to this administration over the years, but in this case it's a little different. It says, for years President Obama has been claiming credit for ending wars when in fact he was pulling the United States out of wars that were far from over. Now the pretense is becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. I mean, all of this instability. It goes on and talks about, of course, the news of the week, the breakdown of Iraq, the chaos, the violence, the beheadings, the gruesome, gruesome violence that's been going on there this past week. And as I said, this is from the Washington Post saying that this idea of getting out and claiming credit, ending the war, it's got to stop. It goes on and says this: if Iraq joins Syria in a full-fledged civil war, the danger to U.S. allies in Israel, Turkey, Jordan, and the Kurdish region of Iraq is immense. These terrorist safe havens also pose a direct threat to the United States, according to U.S. officials. I mean, it quotes in this article a number of U.S. officials, even many in the administration, the White House administration. But look at the threat, the danger here, and also the safe havens that are popping up all over the Middle East, all over Northern Africa. It goes on and says, we know individuals from the U.S., Canada, and Europe are traveling to Syria to fight in the conflict. That's from Jay Johnson, Secretary of the Homeland Security, something he said earlier this year. At the same time, extremists are actively trying to recruit Westerners, indoctrinate them, and see them return to their home countries with an extremist mission. That's the post-American world for you. A world that's getting increasingly more dangerous, especially so in the Middle East. But how much longer before it reaches our own borders? Just in looking at all that's been happening, I just want to, again, continue with this Post editorial. It says, in Syria, where for 3 years Mr. Obama has assiduously avoided meaningful engagement, civil war has given rise to the most catastrophic humanitarian crisis any of us have seen in a generation. And that's a quote from who? That's from Mr. Obama's United Nations ambassador, Samantha Power. She's not exactly a staunch conservative. It says, in Libya, Mr. Obama joined in a bombing campaign to topple dictator Muammar Gaddafi and then declined to provide security assistance to help the nation right itself. It, too, is on the verge of civil war. Of course, we all know what happened on September 11th in 2012 when America's own consulate in Benghazi was attacked. And so you have Libya in civil war, Syria's in civil war, Egypt's still in a state of turmoil. Now you add Iraq to the mix. We've just restocked the Taliban with 5 of their top-tier generals and have announced when we're going to pull out of Afghanistan. It touches upon this in this article as well. Continuing, it says, in Iraq, Mr. Obama chose not to leave a residual force that might have helped keep the nation's politics on track, even as the White House insisted there was no reason to worry. Look, I mean, you heard the clip of the speech earlier. Everything's good. It's a success. Iraq is stable. This is a great achievement. And now we see the reality. Now Mr. Obama is applying the same recipe to Afghanistan. Total withdrawal of U.S. troops by 2016, regardless of conditions. I mean, there's a lot that can happen between now and 2016. But we've made the announcement. It was talked about in the lead up to that speech at West Point recently. And then now we've handed over some of their top generals. That Washington Post article concludes by saying the administration needs to accept the reality of the mounting danger in the Middle East and craft a strategy that goes beyond the slogan of ending war responsibly. That's all it is now. Even the Post acknowledges this. Just empty slogans as the Middle East goes up in flames. That's the reality. It encourages the administration to accept the reality. It's one thing to give a fine speech at West Point or elsewhere or Fort Bragg, but what is the reality? The reality is what you see playing out on the screens of your television or the computer. And those Islamist forces, by the way, I mean, they're publicizing these beheadings, these crucifixions, attracting more recruits in the process. It's horrific, some of the things that are going on. Let's look at Leviticus 26, just a couple of verses here before we conclude. I mean, look at how fast, as we've said to you before, we've talked about this often, look at how fast the United States is falling from power, even as we pull out of all these regions and make such massive cutbacks in military spending here at home. And then, of course, and you have a whole nother story to tell with this, look at all the problems we have here domestically, on our own, you know, right here within our borders. Leviticus 26 and verse 19, a verse we've read so often, God says, "And I will break the pride of your power, and I will make your heaven as iron and your earth as brass." God is breaking the pride of our power. Now, I just picked it up right there in the middle of that chapter. Much more of it is discussed and expounded upon in Herbert W. Armstrong's book, The United States in Britain in Prophecy. You need to get this and study it, because it tells you why what's happening to the United States today is happening. It tells you why these many blessings that we've enjoyed for so many decades are being withdrawn. God's taking them away. He says there in Leviticus, "I'll break the pride of your power." That's happened. And so it was because of this prophecy and others that we said to you, this is back in November 2001. Note the date there. That's just a little ways after 9/11, the original 9/11, when the Twin Towers came tumbling to the ground. It says, does America have the will to see it through? This war against terror, that is. Does America have the will to see it through? What happens when the war spreads from Afghanistan to other less isolated governments, when world opinion begins to turn on the U.S.? See, what happens when opinion and administrations change, time passes by, the American public gets war weary? What happens when our debt escalates? When we descend further into this immoral cesspool? What happens? Will America have the will to win? And will you be able to see fruits of that victory on the ground? Will you be able to accept reality? You remember those statements early on from President Bush in 2002, State of the Union address, how that the war would not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, defeated. That's what he assured not just the American people, but the entire world. And look at where we are today. Of course, you have conservatives wanting to blame the Obama administration, and you have members of the Obama administration wanting to blame the conservatives. In fact, there's some that are suggesting that the Obama administration doesn't want to go and help with this problem in Iraq because it confirms what they had said all along about President Bush getting involved in an unnecessary war. Why go and clean up his mess? That's the sort of thing you have. All politics. One group against the other. And meanwhile, look at America's standing in the world. Look at what's happened to America, the nation. Now, Iran is just forced, quote unquote, to act. No one else will. Iran to the rescue. Let me just refer you to this book once again. You can see the number there on your screen. If you'd like to call today to receive your own copy of The United States in Britain in Prophecy, and of course that quote I gave to you previously about not having the will to win, that was from the Trumpet magazine. You can regularly read thetrumpet.com, of course, for our daily postings, but you also need to subscribe to our monthly magazine. We'll send it right to your mailbox for free. If you'd like the U.S. in Britain in Prophecy, go to the Trumpet website or call this number, and if it's your first time ordering our literature, we'll also set you up to receive a free subscription to our Trumpet magazine. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the Trumpet Daily.